They said the Krauts feared our tanks, our planes, our numbers. But take it from me, kid, none of that scared 'em half as much as our guns. I'm talking about the big ones, the 105s, the 155s, the long-range M1 155mm long toms that could flatten a ridge before breakfast. When those babies started talking, the Krauts didn't fight, they disappeared. You could see it, even in the hardened SS boys, that flicker of panic when our first ranging shot screamed overhead. We used to call it the voice of God. They called it steel rain. I ain't gonna sugarcoat it. War's hell, and nobody walks out clean. But artillery, that was something else. A few clicks later, the world ended for somebody. The hedgerows were thick, the air smelled like cordite and cow dung, and we'd just been told to soften up a German line before the infantry pushed in. Softened up? Hell, we erased it. Trees tore apart like matchsticks, dirt rained down like hail, and for a few minutes it sounded like the sky was splitting open. You'd feel it in your chest, that low rumble, when all our batteries fired in perfect rhythm, one after another, until the whole earth seemed to pulse with thunder. You see, that's why they hated us. Not because we were better shots, though we were damn good, but because our artillery never slept. Day, night, rain, snow, those guns kept talking. And if you were a German soldier crouched in a foxhole on the Western Front, you never knew when the next conversation would start. They called us the Artillery Army, and they weren't wrong. But how did we get that good? What made American artillery the nightmare of every German foxhole? Well, that's a story worth telling. It was late '44. Europe was burning from one end to the other. The brass said the war was winding down, but you wouldn't have known it from where we stood. Somewhere in northern France, where the mud was deep, the sky never cleared, and the nights were colder than a banker's heart. We were just a bunch of tired GIs, knee-deep in muck, running on black coffee, cigarettes, and bad orders. Our world was made of steel, shells, trucks, gun barrels, and the dull clank of spent casings bouncing off frozen ground. Every morning we'd roll out of our tents to find frost on our helmets and rats the size of house cats snooping through our rations. But we didn't complain much. You couldn't. Out there you either got used to hell or you didn't wake up. They called us the gun line. Rows of big, ugly brutes. M2A1 105s and Long Tom 155s lined up like sleeping monsters, waiting for the word to open up. Each gun crew was its own little world. Loaders, sightmen, radio ops, drivers. Everyone had a job, and if one guy slipped, someone downrange paid the price. We didn't see the enemy most days. Our fight was math and mud. Angles, elevations, and powder bags, all scrawled down in greasy notebooks and shouted over static-filled radios. You'd hear coordinates come through from the forward observers, those poor bastards sitting a mile or two ahead with nothing but binoculars and guts. And then it was game time. A few clicks of the sight, a yell to fire for effect, and the ground would come alive. The concussion slapped you in the chest, made your teeth chatter. The blast smelled like burnt metal and fear. Then the silence afterward. That was the worst part. Because you knew somewhere out there, a whole platoon of Germans just stopped existing. You start thinking about that after a while. Not right away, not when the adrenaline's pumping and you're counting your shells like poker chips. But when the sky quiets and you can hear your own heartbeat again, that's when the questions start creeping in. We didn't have much time for philosophy, though. The brass wanted fire missions day and night. Sometimes they'd wake us up just to shell a crossroads for good measure. Didn't matter if it was 2 in the morning or if you'd been up for 36 hours straight. When that phone rang, you hauled ass. You'd stumble through the dark, boots sucking into the mud, frost biting your fingers as you grabbed your helmet and shell casings. The only light came from cigarette tips and the glow of the fire control tent. You'd hear the distant thunder of other batteries, a strange comfort knowing you weren't the only ones awake in this God-forsaken corner of Europe. Funny thing is, we never thought of ourselves as heroes. We were just mechanics at destruction, keeping the machine running. Every man had his ritual, a prayer, a superstition, a joke, something to keep the fear small enough to carry. And when the guns were quiet and the fog rolled in over the fields, we'd stand there and listen to the silence, because we knew it wouldn't last. That's how life was on the gun line. Cold, relentless, and loud enough to make God cover his ears. But across the hedgerows, in the towns we could barely pronounce, the Krauts were starting to realize just how much hell a bunch of muddy farm boys could rain down when the coordinates were right. And soon enough, they'd learn to fear that sound more than any tank or bomber we had. Because when American artillery started to sing, there was no safe place left in Europe. You learn a lot about a man when you share a gun pit with him for months on end. The mud, the cold, the fear, it strips you down to who you really are. And in our battery, we had all kinds. There was Smitty, our gunner, a red-headed joker from Brooklyn, who could quote Sinatra one minute and drop a crowd battery the next. He called his gun Rosie, said she was the only girl that never let him down. When things went quiet, he'd light a Lucky Strike and hum old swing tunes, pretending we were all back home somewhere with clean shoes and real food. Then there was Doc Miller, our medic. Kid barely looked 20, always had his sleeves rolled up and his hands stained with morphine. Didn't matter how many guys he patched up, he still flinched every time the first round went off. He'd choke about it, call it muscle memory from the womb. But we all knew that behind the grin, he carried every man he couldn't save. Corporal Joe Kansas Dyer was the quiet one. Big farm boy, kind of guy who could lift the shell with one arm and quote the Bible with the other. Didn't talk much, but when he did, everyone listened. Once, during a lull, he told us, "You can't shell a man's soul out of him. You just hope you hit the body first." That line stuck with me. Then there was Murphy, our forward observer, the poor bastard who always went ahead of the lines. He'd crawl through mud and wire with a radio pack heavier than sin, calling in fire missions while bullets clipped the grass over his head. When he came back, he looked like a ghost wearing a GI jacket. But he always came back. That was Murphy for you. And of course, there was Captain Reynolds, our CO. Old school Army. Square jaw, calm voice, eyes like cold iron. Never yelled, never panicked. He'd walk the gun line during a barrage like he was inspecting parade troops. He used to say, "Gents, precision wins wars, not noise." We believed him, because every time he barked a coordinate, something out there stopped existing. Each man had his story. Each one had someone back home, a sweetheart, a mother, a farm, a bar stool left empty. Letters came and went like whispers from another world. We'd read 'em by lantern light, passing photos around. A few of us would laugh, others would just stare, like maybe looking hard enough could take us back for a second. But no matter who you were before, farmhand, factory worker, city punk, out here, we were all the same. Dirty, cold, and doing math with death. You see, artillery wasn't glamorous. Nobody made movies about gun crews. We weren't the guys charging bunkers or raising flags. We were the ones behind the curtain, turning coordinates into thunder. And thunder didn't get medals. Still, when you watched those shells arc across the sky and light up the horizon, when you heard that distant German battery go silent, it gave you this feeling. Not pride exactly,
More like relief, because every enemy we buried under steel meant one less chance of them getting close enough to kill our boys up front. Sometimes we'd stand on the ridge after a mission, watching smoke crawl out of the valley. Nobody said much. You could see the thoughts on their faces, the same mix of exhaustion, pride, and guilt. Word turns all that into one blur. That's the thing about artillery. It makes you feel godlike for 10 seconds and haunted for the rest of your life.
Back then, though, we didn't talk about feelings. We talked about shells, weather, and coffee. We cracked dirty jokes and argued over baseball like the world wasn't ending a few miles away. Because that's how you survive, by pretending it's just another day on the job. But deep down, every man on that gun line knew one thing. Our job wasn't just to fight. It was to make damn sure the enemy never forgot who owned the sky, the earth, and every inch of ground in between. And the Krauts, oh, they were starting to learn that lesson the hard way. Because the closer they got to the Western Front, the more they realized the American artillery wasn't just accurate, it was relentless. And once it found you, it never missed twice. We'd been pounding the Krauts for days near a little French town called Mortagne. Maybe you've heard of it. August 44. That's where they tried to break our lines and push us back to the coast. But the only thing they broke was themselves. It started at dawn. The fog was thick enough to choke on, and the air had that heavy, electric stillness, like the world knew something ugly was coming. Then the first German shells came in, whistling, snarling, tearing the earth apart around us. We hit the dirt so fast the mud splashed over our helmets. Radio crackled, voices shouting over static. Fire mission, grid 753-941, armor advancing. That was all we needed. We kicked into gear like a machine waking up. Smitty loaded the first round, Kansas adjusted elevation, and Captain Reynolds stood calm as a statue, calling corrections like he was reading scripture. The first volley screamed out, then the second, and the third. By the fourth, the ground wasn't shaking, it was breathing. The sky turned orange and black, dirt and smoke mixing into one endless storm. You could smell the cordite, the sweat, the fear. We couldn't see a damn thing past the ridge, but we didn't have to. Murphy was out there, eyes on the Krauts, calling in the hits like clockwork. Add 50, fire for effect. That was the call. Every gun on the line answered. The concussion hit your chest like a hammer. The air turned to pressure. It was like trying to breathe underwater. Empty casings piled up round our boots like brass snowdrifts. Our ears rang so bad we couldn't tell if we were shouting or thinking. But the rhythm, God, the rhythm, it was perfect. Load, fire, recoil, smoke. Load, fire, recoil, smoke, like thunder with a heartbeat. Then Murphy came back on the radio, his voice cutting through the chaos. Target neutralized, armor burning. We looked at each other, dirty, deaf, half-crazy grins on our faces. Somewhere out there, a German column had just vanished. We didn't cheer. We just nodded and wiped the sweat off our faces and waited for the next call. Because it never stopped. That day, the Germans kept coming, waves of them trying to punch through. Infantry, half-tracks, Panthers. But every time they moved, our observers picked them up and we dropped hell right on top of them. At one point, their artillery tried to answer back. You'd hear their shells coming long before they landed, that distant moon that makes your gut twist. One of them hit 50 yards from our position, tore up a truck, killed a driver named Benny, quiet kid from Ohio.
Didn't even have time to scream. Doc Miller ran out there through the shrapnel and smoke, came back a minute later, his face gray, hands red. Didn't say a word. Just sat down, lit a cigarette, and stared at the ground until Reynolds gave the next fire order. That's how it was. You didn't stop. You couldn't. You just kept firing because the guys up front were counting on you. By noon, our barrels were glowing red hot. We had to douse them with water between volleys just to keep them from warping. The air shimmered with heat and smoke, and every time the wind shifted, we'd catch the smell of burning diesel and flesh. No one talked about that smell, but it was there. Always there. Somewhere in that chaos, Kansas got hit. Shrapnel caught him in the shoulder when a round cooked off early. Didn't even flinch, just wrapped it with a rag, spat in the dirt and said, "Don't you dare stop firing, boys." We didn't. For hours we kept the rhythm, round after round, hour after hour. The whole sky had turned to fire. By sunset, the valley below us looked like the surface of the moon. Craters, smoke, twisted metal, and bodies that barely looked human anymore. The Krauts tried one last push before dark. We saw their flares pop in the distance, ghostly green against the black. And then Reynolds gave the order, "Fire everything you've got." So we did. Every gun, every tube, every man on the line sent steel flying. The ground shook like Judgment Day. You couldn't tell night from day, just flashes and thunder. Then, silence. No return fire. Just the faint crackle of burning wrecks in the distance. We'd done it. We'd broken the counterattack. But the price, well, that came due later. When the smoke cleared and the stars came out, the valley was quiet. Too quiet. You could almost hear the ghosts moving in the dark. Smitty broke the silence first. He looked out over the fields and said, "Guess the Krauts finally learned to keep their heads down." Nobody laughed, because we all knew what that really meant. We'd won the fight, but we'd bought it in blood and brass.
When dawn came, it didn't feel like morning. It felt like the world had been emptied out. The smoke still hung over the valley like a low ceiling, gray and oily, stretching as far as the eye could see. The sun tried to break through, but all it did was turn the haze orange, like the whole horizon was still bleeding. We walked down the slope, rifles slung, boots crunching over what used to be a German position. No shouting now, no gunfire, just the slow creak of twisted steel cooling in the dirt. You never forget that smell. Burnt oil, gunpowder, and something else you don't talk about. The kind of smell that gets into your skin and stays there, no matter how many showers or years you put between you and that day. Our rounds had landed clean, too clean. Shell craters big enough to swallow a jeep, trees torn out by the roots, bodies half buried under rubble. Some of them still clutching their rifles, others just gone. That was the power of the guns. When they spoke, they didn't argue. They decided. Murphy found what was left of a Panther tank, turret blown clean off, treads melted into the road. He stood there for a long while, quiet. Then he said, almost to himself, "They never stood a chance." Captain Reynolds just nodded. He didn't have to. We all knew what he was thinking, that war isn't about who's right. It's about who's left. We spent the rest of the morning collecting what we could, spent shells, scattered equipment, tags from our own. Kansas was back on his feet, arm in a sling, grinning through the pain. Said he wasn't going to let a little scratch keep him from the next barrage. That's the kind of men those gunners were. Steel on the outside, fire on the inside. By midday, we got word the German counterattack at Mortain had failed completely. Their panzer divisions, what was left of them, were pulling back in tatters. The brass said it was a decisive victory. Maybe it was, but when you're standing in a field of craters and broken helmets, victory doesn't look much like nothing. I remember sitting on an ammo crate, eating cold beans straight from the can, and just listening. For the first time in days, there was no thunder, no whistle of shells, no orders barking through the air. Just wind moving through the grass, and the faint pop of something still burning far off. That silence felt heavier than the noise ever did. We'd given 'em hell, and earned their hate. Every German we faced after that knew the sound of our guns. You could see it in their faces when a shell landed close, like that flash of recognition, like they'd heard the devil knock before. But deep down, most of us weren't proud. We were tired. Because the truth is, artillery doesn't just destroy what it hits. It destroys a piece of the men who fire it, too. Every time we pulled that lanyard, we told ourselves we were saving lives, our boys up front, the ones counting on us. And that was true. But when the smoke cleared and the dust settled, you couldn't help wondering, how many lives did we take with that same pull? That's the thing about power. Once you've seen what it can do, you don't come back the same. Later, a war correspondent visited our battery. He asked Reynolds what made American artillery so deadly. The captain thought for a moment, then said, "It's not the guns that make the difference. It's the men behind them. The ones who don't miss, don't quit, and don't sleep until the job's done." He was right. The Germans feared our guns, but what they really feared was that we never stopped firing.
After Mortain, everything started to change. The Germans were still dangerous, cornered animals always are, but something had cracked. You could feel it. Their lines weren't as tight, their counterfire came slower, and their radio chatter, when we intercepted it, had a different tone. Fear. Our batteries rolled east, through fields that used to be French farms, and towns that were now just names on a map. Everywhere we went, the same story. Blackened trees, busted barns, and a smell that never really left the air. The civilians came out from cellars and woods as soon as the shooting stopped. Old men in worn coats, kids barefoot in the mud, women waving bits of cloth like it was a flag of hope. Some brought us bread, others flowers. One woman even kissed a gun barrel like it was a saint's relic. To them, our artillery wasn't just firepower, it was salvation. But to us, it was just the next job. Because when you've seen what those shells can do up close, it's hard to feel like anyone's savior. By late August, the roads were choked with retreating Germans. Our maps were full of red X's, places we'd hit, places that no longer existed. Every shot, every coordinate moved us closer to the Seine and closer to the heart of the Reich. We'd become a machine, efficient, relentless, almost automatic. Spotters called in targets, coordinates were shouted, breaches slammed, fuses set, fire missions executed in seconds. No hesitation, no emotion, just thunder. And that's when it hit me. Ward turned us into something inhuman. A storm that rolled forward, swallowing everything in its path. One night near Chartres, we were ordered to fire illumination rounds, bright flares to light up the valley for the infantry. The shells went up,
burst open, and the whole world turned white. In that glow, we saw hundreds of German prisoners being marched back along the road, silhouettes of beaten men, shadows of what they'd once been. Some of them limped, some carried the wounded. A few looked straight at us, the gunners, their faces ghost pale under the flares. They didn't curse, they didn't shout, they just stared, as if trying to understand how a few men behind some guns could bring an army to its knees. That look haunted me more than any battlefield.
The brass called it momentum. We called it survival. And yet, even as we pushed east, even as the maps changed and the lines moved faster, there was this unspoken truth between all of us. We were running out of mercy. The longer the war went on, the easier it became to pull that lanyard, and the harder it became to care. But every time we fired, somewhere deep down, you still hoped that maybe one of those rounds meant one less American kid would die up front, that maybe the thunder we made tonight would save a life tomorrow. By September, we were across the Seine, the Germans in full retreat toward the Siegfried Line. Our guns, the same ones they once called Steel Rain, now spoke louder than ever. The Allies were unstoppable, but we all knew the hardest part was still ahead, the fight into Germany itself. We didn't know it yet, but the next time those guns roared, they'd be firing through the forests of the Ardennes, and the world would once again find out what happens when the voice of God falls silent and the devil answers back. When the guns finally went quiet in '45, the silence felt wrong. After years of thunder, the stillness was almost too much to bear. Some of us tried to sleep. Most just stared at the horizon, half expecting another call for fire. They shipped us home one by one. No parades, no bands. Just a train ticket, a duffel bag, and a head full of echoes. The brass called it victory. We called it survival. I still remember the smell of powder, the weight of the shell casing in my hands, the sound of that breech slamming shut. And every time there's a thunderstorm, I swear, I can still hear the guns talking. They said the Germans feared our tanks, our planes, our numbers. Maybe they did. But the truth is, what they really feared was that deep, endless rumble that came before the end. The voice that never missed, never rested, never forgave. Our artillery. In the decades that followed, historians gave it numbers, range, caliber, kill ratios. But those of us who were there know it wasn't about stats. It was about teamwork, about timing, about men who worked in perfect rhythm, loaders, spotters, officers, and gunners, each one trusting the other with their lives. We weren't heroes. We were just kids who learned how to make thunder. And for a time, that thunder helped change the world. So if you ever walk across those quiet fields in France, where the grass grows over old craters and the birds sing where once the shells fell, listen close. You might still feel a faint tremor in the ground. That's history whispering, and it's saying the guns never really stopped. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment on this channel, because these stories of the men, the mud, and the thunder deserve to be remembered. This is history you can still hear if you listen close. Until next time, keep your head down and your heart steady.